welcome to the Work Comp News and Views podcast sponsored by Schlossberg and Umholtz, your go-to source for insights, strategies, and the latest updates in workers' compensation. Whether you're new to the field or a seasoned professional, we've got something for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and or leave a comment. And now it's time to sit back, relax, and enjoy the Work Comp News and Views podcast sponsored by Schlossberg and Umholtz. And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody, wherever you are, whenever you are. And welcome again to the Work Comp News and Views podcast sponsored by Schlossberg and Umholtz. My name is Steve Appel. I am a hearing representative with the firm, and this is part 2 of my interview with the man, the myth, the legend, and of course, the expert when it comes to permanent disability rating and the AMA guides. Basically, this man needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyways. Here's my interview, part 2, with Phil Walker. Phil, let's talk about kite and double kite, permanent disability AMA guidelines. Go ahead.
Great. Let me just say that in my opinion, after 43 years, this is the worst thing that has ever happened in California workers' comp. Why? Because it is producing a massive number of 100% PD cases. And I'm sure your listeners know that if the case is 100% permanent total disability, the applicant gets paid temporary total disability for life. At the present rate, TTD is 1,680, something like that.
Yep.
If you have a 40-year-old, that 40-year-old has a life expectancy, if he's a male, of 37 years, 36.58 actually. If he gets TTD for life, he gets $87,000 a year. And then if you total it times his life expectancy, it's $3.2 million. Okay? And the truth is that I'm like the canary in the coal mine because I get sent all these reports where people say, what can I do? And this can destroy the workers' comp system faster than anything else.
Before we
Now,
go down that road,
sure.
Talk to me about a client that wants to CNR that $3.5 million. They're going to get some between a 3 and a 6% present day discount. Is that correct?
Well, the Fed, it's about 5%. Okay. The annual interest rate. But remember, the amounts are increased based on the increase in the state average weekly wage. And that has hovered around 10% for the last 5 years, maybe even higher than that. And so you reduce it to present value, you calculate what the offset would be for the 5%, and normally what happens is they go to a structured settlement company.
Yes.
That's what they do. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. So, kite and double kite. Kite, a decision by Judge Christopher Miller. He essentially said that the 2005 Permanent Disability Rating Schedule and the AMA guides do not require combining, but instead you can add the whole person impairments or the permanent disability. This is completely incorrect.
And the word synergy or synergistic approach comes into play somewhere, right, Phil?
Yeah, we'll get
we'll get to that. Okay, sorry.
There are 8 specific mandates in the 2005 Permanent Disability Rating Schedule that you must combine all permanent disabilities. In the AMA guides, there are 4 mandates. The Permanent Disability Rating Schedule is only promulgated by the director. So a judge does not have the power to usurp the words of the Permanent Disability Rating Schedule. But in this case, the judge said something that's false. He said there are no mandates for combining, and you can simply add the whole person impairment or the permanent disability. In the Kite case, the patient had 2 hip replacements. He got 20% whole person impairment for each. The doctor added them together rather than combining and said the overall impairment was 40% whole person impairment. When combining, it would be 36%. Now, that may not be some huge difference. It came out to a difference of $13,000.
Yeah. What the heck is 4% one way or the other, right?
That's right. It came out to $13,000, and the judge issued this decision, and the doctor said, "I'm adding them because of synergy." He claimed that a person who has had a right hip replacement would be less able to compensate if he had a subsequent left hip. Well, let me tell you, this is BS. I've had a hip replacement. And once you have the replacement, within 6 months, you are back to a completely normal hip. There is no difficulty in compensation. The doctor's opinion was incorrect, and I have researched this. There is no medical literature on this theory of synergy. Okay, so then what happened? The decision goes up to the WCAB. Of course, they adopt it completely, because what does it do? It encourages higher amounts of money to claimants. Okay, now let me speak about the WCAB on this. This issue has gone up a little bit on appeal. And in the appellate case, which is called Fitzpatrick or Fitzgerald, I can't remember. If you email me at phil@askphilwalker.com, I'll send you the reference. The WCAB outright lied to the appellate court. They filed a brief, and all of the references in the brief were to the 1997 PD rating schedule, not the 2005, which was operable, and all the cases they cited were under the 1997 schedule. And the appellate court called them out and ripped them to shreds because they were citing the wrong law. And let's be blunt, Steve, this is a mistake that a second semester law student would not make. So you tell me why the WCAB was citing inapposite law.
I am going to answer your question, which is probably not answering your question, and let's move on to our next topic, which is left ventricular hypertrophy.
Great. But I want to say what double kite is first.
Yeah.
In the kite case, you added the impairments in one medical report. In double kite, if you have 4 medical reports, you add all of the impairments in each. And the average total that you get is 80% permanent disability in most cases. And that comes out to $245,000. Now, this is what I am seeing. Imagine this. Orthopedic rating, 30% PD. Neurological rating, 40%. That brings you to 70. Cardiac rating, 30%. That brings you to 100. Psych rating, 25%. That brings you to 125% permanent total disability. Permanent disability. There is no such thing. It doesn't exist. And yet, this is why all of these cases, what a smart applicant's attorney does is he claims what we call skin and contents. Every body part. He sends the individual to 8 evaluations, and then he adds all of the impairment. And that's why I'm seeing this huge flurry of 100% cases. And they run between $1.8 and $3.4 million, depending upon the life expectancy of the injured worker. Okay, that's double kite.
We've got 5 minutes to talk about left ventricular hypertrophy.
Great.
Yeah.
Left ventricular hypertrophy. Let me explain what this is. It comes from high blood pressure. If you have high blood pressure, what that means is your heart has to pump harder than normal to get the blood, which contains the oxygen, into the rest of your body. And when the heart has to pump, it is a muscle. So the more it pumps, the larger it gets. The pumping chamber of the heart is called the left ventricle. When people have high blood pressure, it makes it harder for the heart to pump the blood. So what happens? The left side of the heart enlarges. Now, if you go onto the AMA guides and you look at this, you'll find out left ventricular hypertrophy confirmed by echocardiogram rates at 39% whole person impairment. Okay? And every case I've had, the cardiologists rate it, and they rate it at 39%. And you know who gets this the most? The police, the firefighters, the safety officers, because they have
the presumption. They have the presumption.
Bingo. Bingo. So they all file for this. But here's the problem. I got a call from the city of San Diego, and they called me and they said, we're getting all these left ventricular hypertrophy cases. What can we do? And I went online. I didn't know this. And I found out that 90% of these patients can be treated to full recovery in 11.5 months. And you treat them with what we call ABC. ACE inhibitors, that would be lisinopril. Beta blockers, and then calcium channel blockers. And these, essentially what they do is they eliminate the high blood pressure. And then the heart goes back to normal. The size, the pumping, because the pumping is normal. How do I know this? In December, I suffered a massive pulmonary embolism when I was on vacation. And what happened is blood clots went into my lungs and blocked both lungs, 90%. So my heart had to go wild pumping. When I was in the emergency room, they did an ultrasound of my heart, and the cardiologist said, because of your pumping, the left ventricle is double the size that it should be. Okay? And what did they do? They gave me medication, and over the course of a week of blood thinners and hypertension medication, my left ventricle returned to normal size. Well, that's what happens with these patients. But what happens is I've never seen a California workers' comp cardiologist say this in a report. Never. And so if you don't know about this, how can you question them? Most workers' comp lawyers don't know about left ventricular hypertrophy. But if you have the medical reports, you go into that deposition, you slam them down in front of Dr. Ho-Ho, and you say, you're a cardiologist. Have you ever heard that treatment improves the condition? Did you treat this patient? Has this patient been treated by his cardiologist? How can he be at MMI if he hasn't undergone the necessary treatment? And I think I told you, I had this lawyer that I trained and I sent the medical literature. She did this in a deposition. The doctor immediately backed down and said he's not MMI. He needs this treatment. He may completely recover, and therefore I cannot rate him. And the lawyer called me up and said, Phil, I can't believe this. I would never have known what to do if you hadn't guided me.
And that completes the first half of my part 2 interview with the amazing, outspoken, clearly defense-oriented, but that's okay because he clearly is an expert when it comes to permanent disability rating and the AMA guides, attorney Phil Walker. By the way, this is a good time to say that the opinions expressed by Phil Walker are his opinions only and do not reflect the opinions of myself nor the law offices of Schlossberg Umholtz. You dialed in to Work Comp News and Views, sponsored by Schlossberg and Umholtz. Please like, share, and subscribe. And now, without further ado, let's get back to the second half of my part two interview with Phil Walker. Phil, why don't you talk for a few minutes about rating orthopod reports, especially when you get a report that has all different parts of one extremity. For example, the toes, the foot, the ankle, the shin, the knee, and the thigh. Go ahead, Phil.
Oh, Steve, it's worse than that.
Oh my
I
goodness.
I am seeing a barrage, a blizzard, I don't know what you would call it, of these reports. They tend to fall in either professional athletes or older people. So here's what happens. The orthopedist rates the cervical spine, the thoracic spine, the lumbar spine, right and left shoulder, right and left hips, right and left wrists, right and left knees, right and left ankles, wrists, hands, fingers, toes. Okay? And then they use kite and they say add all of these together. And the rating usually comes out to about 80%.
Now, in the old school,
Yeah.
we would say that all of those ratings are subsumed into one rating, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. But it comes out usually to 80%. And then that's $240,000. Okay. But what you're really going to find when you review these reports, I find this in 100% of them. The doctors lie. I'm sorry to be so direct, but that's the truth.
And I know I say this at the end of each podcast, but these are just Phil's opinions and
right.
neither my opinions or my law firm's. Please continue,
That's
Phil.
right.
Yes.
That's absolutely right. So here's what they'll do. They'll rate the cervical spine and they'll claim that it is a DRE2 and it should rate at 5% whole person impairment. But it turns out and they will claim the patient has muscle spasm. But if you go back to the physical examination, there's no muscle spasm identified. So they have lied. And this is my personal opinion. And they do the same thing with thoracic, same thing with lumbar. So you get 5 on each, that's 15% whole person impairment. Then they move into the shoulders and they claim there are restrictions on range of motion. If you review other doctors' reports that measured this when the patient was MMI, there was no restriction on range of motion. And the guides say the measurements must fall within 10% between two evaluators if they're doing the same evaluation when the patient is MMI. I see incredible numbers of reports, and that's on page 20 of the guides, where the treating doctor measurements or other evaluators, the shoulder is completely normal in all of its motions. And then this, what I call multi-body part orthopedist, claims there are limitations in motion, which are inconsistent with other reports. Now, so literally, they make up the findings in many of the body parts. And they claim in the discussion that all of these findings are present because they hope the claims examiner or the defense attorney do not know to look back at the physical examination and see what the reported findings are. Now, why are there differences? Because often the physical examination is done by somebody other than the orthopedist. Okay? I'm sorry to say that, but that happens all the time. Or the orthopedist is claiming findings that do not exist. So how do you attack this? You have to make sure that each of the AMA ratings is accurate, okay? And then That's usually the biggest thing. You then depose the doctor and question him on why there's an inconsistency between what he says in his discussion, the finding is, and what the physical examination shows. You question him on inconsistencies with other medical evaluations. And this is really fun. The orthopedists never look back at their prior reports. Never, never, never. So in the deposition, you say, Dr. Ho-Ho, how is it possible that he had no muscle spasm on physical exam a year ago? You said he was MMI. And now he has no muscle spasms on physical exam, but you claim he has muscle spasms. Can you explain that to me, Dr. Ho-Ho? And they will always say the same thing. I think I need a re-eval. And when they do the re-eval, they always cut down the findings because they know you have ripped them to shreds and you're going to file a motion that the report is not substantial medical evidence under Escobedo.
And this is probably a very good time to remind all the listeners that the opinions expressed by Mr. Phil Walker are his and only his, and do not either echo or reflect my opinions or the opinions of the firm that I work for. Phil, can you talk for the last part of the podcast about trigeminal nerve?
Great. This is one I'm now seeing all the time. A chiropractor in Southern California invented this. And the claim is that trigeminal nerve should be used to rate headaches. Why? Because under the guides, chapter 18, headaches rate at 3% whole person impairment. Under the guides, trigeminal nerve, the top rating is 35% whole person impairment. So you can see that you can really increase the whole person impairment by claiming the headaches come from the trigeminal nerve. Now, what is the trigeminal nerve? It comes from the scalp and it goes down the side of each face. And it branches out into 3 branches that go to our mouth, our nose, and it controls our chewing, our smelling, our swallowing, all of these activities. Now, it comes from the scalp, and that's where the chiropractor claims that the headaches are. Okay, fine. There are tests that, let me tell you the truth. This is a real condition. You may know it by the old name, tic douloureux. And it is described as the most horrible pain a human can experience. Okay?
In other words, it would prohibit any and all other activities, correct?
Bingo.
Yeah.
It precludes any activities of daily living. Okay? That's the bottom line, and that's how the 35% rating is defined. It says severe, this is on page 331 of the guides. It says 35% severe, uncontrolled, unilateral, or bilateral facial neuralgic pain that prevents performance of activities of daily living. Okay? Now, how do you get rid of this? It turns out that there are tests that need to be done. And the tests, you go down each branch of the nerve and you test it with a pen. That's called, you test it with a pen, you test it with temperature, and you test it with light touch, which is taking a handkerchief or a silk cloth and rubbing it along where the nerve goes. And you do these particular tests, and the patient must demonstrate excruciating pain when you do that. Page 331 says, evaluate sensation, that's feeling, in the parts of the nerve served by the 3 major divisions with the usual techniques: pain, temperature, and touch. Compare the two sides to see if the findings are the same or different. Bilateral facial sensation loss is uncommon. So here's what happens. You evaluate it with a pen, you evaluate it with cold, and I know this sounds crazy, but you evaluate it with light touch. That can either be hand stroking on the face or a handkerchief or silk or something like that. Anyway, you will find out in 100% of these cases, the doctors never do these tests. You will also find out that the doctors almost never evaluate both sides of the face. Okay? So how do you attack this? Number one, you establish that they haven't done the necessary tests. Number two, remember that the high rating comes from preventing the performance of activities of daily living. So, just like Steve said, you depose the opponent, the applicant. You turn to page 4, table 1-2, the list of activities of daily living. And you ask the applicant which of these are impaired by your trigeminal nerve problems. And then once you get his testimony under oath, you hire a sub rosa and you show that none of this is true. Because people with regular headaches function normally in life. How many times have you, as a workers' comp attorney, had a massive headache? Probably very common in your career. And people who have headaches function normally.
Well, generally speaking, those people, and I'll speak for myself, those headaches do not last 24/7 in perpetuity.
And they usually do not produce excruciating pain running down the side of the face.
And with that, unfortunately, we are done. Phil, would you like to give your contact information for the listeners?
Yes, I love helping people with correct ratings, outlines of doctor depositions, and strategy. You can reach me at Phil, P-H-I-L, at askphilwalker.com. I usually get back to you in about 24 hours, or you can call me, 415-816-3527.
And that completes my two-part interview with attorney Phil Walker. If you want an expert, and I mean an expert, in the AMA guides or permanent disability rating, Phil is your man. And thank you all very much for listening. You've been dialed in to another edition of Work Comp News and Views, sponsored by Schlossberg and Umholtz. My name is Steve Appel. I'm a hearing representative for the firm, and thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to share and subscribe. You've been listening to the Work Comp News and Views podcast, sponsored by Schlossberg and Umholtz. The opinions expressed on Work Comp News and Views are for entertainment purposes only and not to be considered legal advice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and or leave a comment. Also, feel free to send an email directly to sappel@schlossberglaw.com. For Work Comp News and Views and Schlossberg and Umholtz, my name is Steve Appel, and thanks for listening.